Hello everyone. In this video, we're going to be talking about exams some more because exams are a very lovely and important part about college. We'll talk about uh, more about how to avoid overconfidence on exams because this is pretty important and can be a common experience. And we'll talk about, excuse me, we'll talk about performance during exams. So last week we talked about how to prepare for exams. This week we will talk about what to do during the exam, or maybe like the hour before the exam, and talk about things like how to reduce test anxiety, um, how to better improve our performance on difficult questions on exams, how to answer essay questions, things like that. So yeah. So in this video, a little overview, we'll talk about how to judge when we are ready for exams. Then we'll talk about strategies during exams and not listed on here, but we will also talk about a specific strategy for essays for how to write essays during exams. Because oftentimes it is it can be difficult to write essays during an exam when you have a time constraint, and you're timed and you have to write it quickly. So we'll talk about how to do that. First, overconfidence. So I want you all think about what we've already talked about and what you already know. For this question, how can you judge if you are ready for an exam? So we will talk about this, but first I want you all to pause and take a second and think about this. Okay, now we'll come back. There are a few things that we can do to judge when we are ready for an exam. First big thing, we've talked about some of this in last week's videos. First recognize that there are different levels of knowing something, right? So this refers back to what we talked about before with, excuse me, with knowing something versus understanding something. Right, so a little bit of a refresher is that knowing something means just having a shallow understanding of the facts, right? So maybe I'm able to list a bunch of important events and dates of World War II. Understanding means connecting those different facts, right? So maybe connecting how each event in World War II led to the next event, how each event helped cause World War II, things like that, forming theories, answering bigger questions like why and how. So consider what is the level of knowledge that you know about a topic, right? And oftentimes we might be, excuse me, we might be overconfident and um, think we have a higher level of understanding than what we really have. And so, how do we determine accurately what is our level of knowledge? Is to quiz ourselves, right? So, if I'm able to really give a thorough answer about why did World War II happen, and I'm able to really, in writing or maybe just speaking or explaining to myself, I'm able to give a really thorough and lengthy, detailed response about all these different events and all the different ways that they are connected. If I'm able to really have a deep answer to this question, then I have a very good understanding. But if I am just able to like recite some facts and be like, yeah, I know that like Hitler has something to do with World War II happening, and I know that Japan had something to do with it, and I know that like World War One had some, but I can't really have a thorough explanation, just I have factual information, then it shows that my level of knowledge is much lower. Um, so determine first what is your level of understanding. Determine this by actually quizzing yourself, not just thinking, but really quizzing yourself. Um, and from there, you can understand if you need more practice, more preparation, or not. Um, Another thing is to avoid overconfidence. We've already talked about this, but avoid rereading and instead quiz yourself, right? So we've talked about this. Um, The reason why rereading can make you feel more overconfident is when you are just rereading your notes or a textbook, you are not quizzing yourself, and so you're not actively identifying the gaps of your knowledge. And it can be uncomfortable, it can feel uncomfortable to identify gaps in your knowledge, in the short term, but in the long term, it's necessary to make those mistakes because we can only learn by overcoming our mistakes, right? Um, and so quizzing yourself using basically all the strategies we've talked about in the last week, things like retrieval practice, spacing instead of cramming, flashcards, practice problems with math, all that kind of stuff will help you much more with reducing overconfidence. Another thing is wait for some time before testing yourself. And so in last week's sets of videos, I recommended with the massive set of flashcards as like one way to really thoroughly study for an exam. I recommended to study with that set of flashcards and to make a goal, right? To say something like, I am ready for this exam if I'm able to get 80% of flashcards correct or 90% of flashcards correct. So setting this goal can help you understand where you are at and judge if you are ready for an exam. It's also beneficial to wait for some time though before testing yourself, right? So maybe I study, from 4 to 5 p.m. I study for the exam with my set of with my set of flashcards. Then maybe at 5 o'clock I eat dinner, I take a break, and at 6 p.m. I take however long, right? Maybe 15 minutes, whatever it is. But at 6 p.m. or 7 p.m., I wait an hour or two, and then I test myself with those flashcards and see if I get 80% of them correct. So this is beneficial to avoid overconfidence because this is getting into a more realistic environment for the exam. Because realistically for the exam, you will not just, study for the exam and then right after the studying take the exam. There's going to be some amount of time, right? So maybe you study the night, maybe the last study session that you have for the exam is the night before. And then you have 8 hours of sleep, right? Always get, a good amount of sleep before an exam. So you get good sleep and then you take the exam, right? So there's going to be some time where you're going to have some forgetting. And so that's why you want to wait some time before you test yourself and judge if you're ready for the exam to get into a more realistic scenario, right? And even if you study for an exam right before the exam happens, right? Maybe the exam is at like 3 p.m. and you study the morning up. There's still probably going to be some time between the study session and the exam because maybe you're walking to class or you're taking the bus to class, whatever it is. And so, long story short, try to wait some time before you test yourself and see, okay, can I get 80% of the practice problems for this math exam correct? Can I get 90% of the flashcards correct? And from there, then you can judge more accurately if you are ready for the exam. Next big thing is to test yourself with a variety of different questions, right? So, excuse me. This is really based on what type of exam you will have, what type of questions will be on the exam. But if you know that there's going to be a mix of questions that range from like factual questions that are very simple to more elaborate, in-depth questions with deeper understanding, then test yourself with a variety of these questions and determine what questions, what type of questions you need more help on, right? So, for instance, this is an example here. So use questions like, what year did Germany invade Poland? And what did France think of this action, right? So these are very simple questions, as well as more deeper questions like, why is this event significant to the overall timeline? Or why didn't the US just join the war after Germany invaded Poland? So these questions will help you identify the level of understanding that you have and what type of questions you need more help with, which is helpful for judging if you're ready for the exam. Next big thing is after you think you are well prepared for the exam, study for a little bit more. This is really just based on your schedule for the week and how much time you want to dedicate to the course, how important is this course. But you know, it's beneficial though to study for a little bit more than what you think you need. One reason is because we can just be overconfident. So like research has shown that in some situations we're just like naturally more overconfident than we really are. And the past strategies we've talked about so far will help you with this overconfidence, but even studying a little bit more than what you think you will need will help as well. Another reason I've written down here is suppose that you're studying for a history quiz and you got to know 16 events in World War II. You might be able to memorize those events at the end of your study session, the night before the quiz. But like I said, you have to wait before taking the quiz, right? Maybe you study and then you take a good rest of 8 hours, and then you eat breakfast and then you commute to the class, whatever it is. And so there's like a 12-hour gap, and you find that on the quiz, you can only remember half the events, or maybe 12 out of the 16. That's because you needed to study a little bit more, a little bit extra. And so to counteract this, you can study for a little bit more than what you think, or you can try to study the day of the exam, right? So maybe you try to get to class maybe 15 minutes early and study the 15 minutes before the exam starts or the quiz starts. So yeah, going on to the next slide. So this is pretty much everything I have for avoiding overconfidence and judging when you are ready for an exam. This was a lot, so I want you all to take a second, reflect on what we talked about, and think about this question. So, when judging if I'm ready for an exam, I used to blank, now I blank. So take a second and pause and think about this question. All right, now we're going to come back. We will talk now about how to improve our performance on exams during the exam itself. So I want you all to think about what you already know, your prior knowledge and experience, and answer this question. What are strategies to improve your performance during exams and lessen your test anxiety? And then we will talk about what we can do about these two things. All right, now we're going to come back and we'll talk about how to improve our performance during exams. So, first, we'll talk about lessening our test anxiety. So, this is a very normal part of college that a lot of people experience, is fear both before and during exams. So, here are some tips. One thing is remember that everyone else also feels stressed, right? So, you're not alone. This helps because, like, sometimes we can think that like we're alone, right? That like for some reason like we are going to just fail this exam and like we are we're gonna fail and it's just us. But oftentimes this is just a normal phenomenon. Um, and this helps because like sometimes we can feel ashamed of feeling stressed or anxious. And when we acknowledge that other people feel this way, we can feel less shame and we can feel that this is just a normal experience. Another thing to know about test anxiety that I don't think I said here, but it's also can sometimes be beneficial, right? So there's this concept called eustress, EUSTRESS that you can look up, where a little bit of stress and anxiety is actually beneficial because that little bit of stress and anxiety can help make us be more focused and put in more effort, right? Because when we're stressed out, then we're like, oh crap, I need to actually really lock in and focus. So a little bit of stress and anxiety is beneficial, and realistically, you'll always have a little bit of stress of anxiety, most likely, no matter what. Um, and so really, it's like a little bit is okay. It's really when there's too much and we are losing our focus and we are stressing out and we can't put our entire mind on the exam that it's a problem. So, another thing that you can do to reduce your test anxiety to a more manageable and beneficial level is remind yourself that doing poorly is not the end of the world, right? So, most likely, if you fail an exam, which is normal, right? Many people do this, is a common experience. If you fail an exam, it's not the end of the world, right? So, like, you might get a C in the course. And having a C in one class, isn't the best, right? Like you want to do better, but it's not going to end your career, right? You can still have a very successful college experience, a very successful career with a C in a class, right? It's not the end of the world. And in the worst case scenario, maybe you have to retake the class. And don't get me wrong, like that does suck. Maybe you get like a low enough grade that you have to retake the class the next semester, and that does suck, and it might cost you some money to retake the course, but it's not going to be the end of the world, right? So just remind yourself that this isn't going to, doing poorly on the exam is not going to just collapse your life. It's going to be okay. Um, Another thing to know is that sometimes being near people during exams can make you more anxious, right? So if that's you, just sit in a place that's isolated, maybe in the back of the room. Um, Another thing, this is helpful for me, is before the exam, just take a few deep breaths to calm yourself, right? Like sometimes we think that the best way to spend our time before an exam is to just study, right? To just study right up until the exam starts. And that can be beneficial, but sometimes it's just better to just like chill out, to just take a few deep breaths, maybe get up and just go for a short walk, right? Maybe just walk and get a drink of water or go to the bathroom before starting the exam. Um, just to calm yourself, right? It can also be beneficial to just like take a few moments and just like kind of feel the anxiety, like just identify where it is in your body, right? Maybe you feel a tightness in your chest or in your neck, something like that. And through the process of identifying, feeling what you are experiencing in your physical body, it'll feel uncomfortable at first, but when you feel that, you're kind of processing that emotion and you're letting that emotion kind of vent out and leave your body when you take some time to experience it. The last big thing that can help with anxiety is to visualize someone that is supportive of you, right? So think of someone that is supportive of you, that's always confident in you. So maybe somebody in your family, maybe a friend or a mentor, a teacher that you look up to, and just visualize them reminding you of all the preparation that you've done or how much of a good student you are, right? Like all the work that you have done to get yourself to this position, right? This can sometimes help. So I know that there's like these are a lot of strategies, right? Pick whichever ones you think will work best for you. For instance, for me, like I like to take deep breaths and just like calm myself. I'm not really somebody that like visualizes stuff. I find that like it's not really that helpful, or like maybe it is helpful, but other stuff is more helpful to me. So try stuff out and identify what is beneficial to you. Okay, so that was test anxiety. Now we'll talk about some other things to help for exam performance. First thing is, excuse me. Once the exam starts, you should take a few minutes to just survey all the questions, look through all the questions in the exam. The reason why, there's a few different reasons. First, you can notice what is going to be the most difficult and easiest questions, as well as what are going to be the most time-consuming questions. Um, and when you look at all the questions in the exam, you can also approximately predict how much time each question will take, right? The reason why this is important is oftentimes exams are timed, and so what you really want to do is prioritize the questions that are worth the most points, and oftentimes it'll tell you in the, like maybe on the side, how much points each question is worth. So prioritize both what are the most important questions, the ones with the most points, but also what are the most easiest, right? So for instance, let's say there are two questions on an exam, right? And both are worth 10 points, right? One question I know is going to be very easy for me, and it'll take me only 2 minutes to answer. Then another question is going to be very difficult, and it's going to take me 10 minutes, and I don't even know if I can get it right. They're both worth 10 points. So in that scenario, it's just going to make more sense for me to just do the easier question first and prioritize that because they're worth the same amount of points, but I know I can get this one right, the easier one. Um, so, when you're able to survey the questions, look through all of them, you can make a plan of what questions you want to do and prioritize the ones that are easiest and the ones that will give you the most points. So, next big thing is for the most difficult questions, the ones that are challenging, look at them multiple times. So I know that I just said that you might want to focus on the easiest questions first. Sometimes, though, it's beneficial to look at the most difficult questions, and once you are stuck, then uh, go to a different question, maybe the easier ones, and then come back to the more difficult questions. The reason why this is kind of it gets into some psychology that I don't think it's that important for me to explain, but basically there's some research that shows that when we, excuse me, when we are confronted with a really, excuse me, a really difficult problem, we have a part of our mind that is kind of working in the background to solve that problem, even when we're focusing on something else. So a common experience of this is, let's say you are walking somewhere, or maybe you are washing yourself, something like that. Oftentimes, when your mind is completely unfocused on something, or focused on something else, like walking to some place, you find that you recognize a solution to a problem or some new thought that is helpful that you didn't recognize before. Why is that? It's because part of our minds is working in the background automatically to kind of solve problems that we are not yet able to solve. And so the way that we can apply this part of our minds is to focus on the difficult questions, to get stuck on them, and then focus on easier stuff. And when we focus on easier stuff, by the time we come back to the more difficult questions, we may have some new thoughts about, excuse me, about how to overcome the challenge, right? Another reason to do this too is, um, you know, let's say the first time I look at a difficult question, I'm stuck with it. Then the next time I look at the difficult question, maybe I just remember something in my mind that I did not recognize the first time I look at the question, right? And the gap between the first and second time I look at the question, I'm able to recall something that was in the back of my memory. That's another reason why you should do this. So yeah, but obviously this also depends on how much time you have for the exam and prioritizing what exam questions are going to be most beneficial to you. Um, so you should still be doing this while thinking about all the other ways that you can answer the other questions within the limited time you have. Okay, so some other exam tips for excuse me, for complicated questions, read the directions multiple times, right? So this is especially important for like essay topics or essay questions or like really lengthy problems that have like multiple steps or even a rubric is exam questions, essay questions can be very overwhelming, especially when we're like stressed out and there's limited time and we're anxious, right? It's very easy to lose track of everything we have to do for that exam topic or the essay question. And so, what I would like to do, when I would do when I was in like an exam, is for these really challenging questions, is read it once then maybe start solving the problem. For an essay, maybe it's start making an outline or start brain dumping all the stuff I know about the essay topic. Then after working through the challenge a little bit, then I reread those directions and I make sure I have everything that I need to have, right? And maybe usually I would recognize that there was like one or two things I'm missing out on. And then if that was the case, I would just make a note. I would just write out like focus on this, right? Or maybe I make a maybe I underline that part in the directions, maybe I start whatever it is. So do this for the challenging questions. Another tip is at the end of the exam, take a few moments to look over the questions and make sure that you don't have any careless mistakes, right? So for instance, for a math exam, right? Maybe you are doing word problems and you are being graded on stuff like, did you show your work? Or do you have the correct units, right? Do you say that your answer is in meters or centimeters or whatever, right? Just take a few minutes, look over, and see if you have everything right, just to make sure that you're getting all the points possible and getting the best score that you can get. And last thing, to really reiterate this point, is to read each question carefully, right? So don't just assume that you know what's being asked, right? Just read everything. This is especially this is my experience as a teacher that makes tests and then looks at how students get questions wrong. Is that oftentimes students will read only half the question and just, because they're like under time pressure or they're anxious, they just assume they know what's being asked and so they just quickly answer it and then move on. And they just get it wrong because they just don't read all of the question and they miss out on some important detail. So just take your time, right? Take a deep breath and, just read each question, give it as much time as it needs. Okay, so we'll skip this question. Now we'll go on to the last thing we'll talk about for this video, which is how to write essays. So this can be challenging and stressful because essays can be a time-consuming thing, and oftentimes it's normal to be writing an essay and then like just in the middle of writing, your just mind goes blank. You're just not able to think about what to write next. That's normal, right? It's called writer's block. Um, and so that is normal, but on, exams, we want to try to avoid that as much as possible. And so one way to do this is this three-step plan for essay writing. So Uh, the first step here is to list, or what I think of as a brain dump everything that you think should be part of the essay that's relevant to the question, right? So let's use the example that for some reason I've been using this entire course of the causes of World War II, right? I've got to write an essay on what were the most important causes of World War II. First step is I am brain dumping everything that I remember about World War II and the causes of it, right? So I'm making a big list. It can be very disorganized. Right now, I just don't care about organizing it. Maybe I do have a little bit of organization, but I'm just focused on just making a big enough list as I can possibly make. Um, and when I'm making this list, I want to check frequently at the essay prompt, to make sure that I'm getting all the details that are related to the prompt, right? So for instance, maybe the essay prompt is also asking me about technology. How did technology lead to World War II? I want to make sure that in my big brain dump list of everything that I know, that I'm also talking about how technology led to World War II, right? Stuff like improvements in like bombers and how Germany utilized that to its advantage, right? Stuff like that. It can also be helpful to think in terms of the hierarchy of organization of ideas, right? So that's like the tree diagram where we've got like one main idea and then like two or three or four supporting ideas and then a bunch of facts to support each idea. So making this diagram while you're making this list can also be beneficial if you want to do that. And then as we make this list and we make it more and more detailed, we want to try and make sure that every single claim that I write can be supported by evidence, right? So for instance, with World War II, let's say I argue that the rise of fascism was a contributor to World War II. So things like propaganda, things like Hitler using propaganda to manipulate the people to think that his cause was the right cause, right? If this is one of my claims that propaganda and fascism led to World War II, I want to write evidence, specific details that support this claim, right? So maybe I will reference a few major pieces of propaganda that support this idea. Maybe I'll talk about, for instance, like Hitler's Mein Kampf, right? A really famous book that he wrote to talk about why he should be elected and why Germany was doing so poorly after World War One. So just writing evidence to support each claim. So if we go to the next slide. Second thing that I want to do, after I have this big list of ideas, they can be very disorganized, or maybe there's a little bit of organization. What I then want to do is write an outline for how the essay will be organized. right? So this is where I'm going to determine things like my thesis statement. I'm going to determine things like what are my body paragraphs going to be, right? With World War II, maybe my thesis statement is, I don't know, the um the way Germany was treated after World War One and technology were the main causes of World War II, right? So that's my thesis statement. I want to note down what are my body paragraphs, what are the main claims in each of the body paragraphs. I want to note down in my outline the supporting details and evidence that will be in each body paragraph. And in my thesis, how am I going to support the body paragraphs? And I also want to note down what or how I will transition from one idea to the next. I also want to note down how the essay will conclude. Um, the reason why is if I know how I'm going to end the essay, I'm going to then be able to write, note down from that endpoint how I want to kind of lead to that conclusion, right? So maybe I want to conclude with a powerful fact or a powerful story about World War II or something like that, right? I can then note down how I can lead up to that conclusion. Then once I make this outline, I should write. So, this outline basically is just my entire plan and really should be the entire essay just written out for me, just lacking some details and some elaboration, right? So once I have this outline, I should know, okay, these are my body paragraphs, this is my essay, this is going to be my introduction paragraph, my conclusion. Everything should be easy for me to write because I have the entire step-by-step plan written out for this outline. So, as always, you should be mindful for how much time you have and how much time you should take, right? So, let's say, for instance, I've really, really prepared myself very well for this essay exam to the point that if I go back to this first step of just brain dumping everything I know, let's say I can note down, you know, 6 different causes for World War II. That's great, but for the essay, maybe I only need to talk about 2 or 3 causes, and that's it. If that's the case, then it really doesn't do any good to note down 6 different causes and all the supporting evidence for those 6 causes when it's not helpful, right? Because in the essay, I can only talk about 2 or 3. So in that case, I need to just save my time, just note down the 2 or 3 most important causes and the details, and then just go on to the next step, right? So just always making sure that you are cognizant, aware of the time. So now I'll show you guys a example of this sort of essay plan in action. So this is an example. Let's say, excuse me, I have an essay question of what were the broad effects of the Industrial Revolution, right up here on the top. Furthermore, evaluate the Industrial Revolution. Was it a force for good, bad, or a mix of both, right? So the Industrial Revolution, this is really referring to stuff like the rise of factories, the use of things like coal, eventually the use of things like railroads, trains, steamboats, electricity, all these sorts of stuff, right? The first step I'm going to do is just note down a brain dump of all the facts I know, right? So you can see this is a list. I made a bulleted list of everything that I remember about this topic in this essay question. And you can see it's very disorganized, right? I've got made lots of money for industrial countries as an effect. I have some facts, basic facts like James Watt, excuse me, the steam engine in the 1700s. I just list down a bunch of different facts that I know related to this big question. Then what I do is I have an outline. So this is the second step. And you can see here I have, I transform this, excuse me, this very disorganized list of facts into a very well-organized outline. So I've got my argument, my thesis statement right here. The Industrial Revolution had many negative impacts on the world, including detrimental environmental impacts and the growth of imperialism, as well as many economic impacts that were positive. Right? So that's my thesis statement. This is my argument that I'm going to put in my introduction. Excuse me. Then here I have my body paragraph. So I have number 1, environmental impacts, and I've got, excuse me. a bunch of supporting evidence for the environmental impacts, right? So I've got coal and pollution, things like that. And then you can note down, you can see for the first and second body paragraphs, I also have the transition, right? So I have for environmental impacts, the transition is that the demand for raw resources led to imperialism. Then the second paragraph, I've got imperialism. I talk about how raw resources, the demand led to things like the scramble for Africa, and all sorts of other stuff that happened, such as the colonization of, or not colonization, but imperialism in Asia with the Philippine War, things like that. And then I have a transition statement where these global acts of imperialism also coincided with global transformations in the world economy. And then from there, I talk about the economic impacts, right? So here in this outline, I have a very clear understanding of how I'm going to write this essay, and I've got the conclusion. And the conclusion is where I'm just restating my thesis. So the Industrial Revolution had numerous, excuse me, negative environmental and economic impacts, as well as a new wave of imperialism. So this is just me restating my thesis and concluding the essay. So obviously with the essay, you're going to write a little bit more, right? You're going to flesh out each of these details. Maybe you're going to write a hook statement in the introduction to kind of grab the reader's interest, if that's what the professor is looking for in your essay, things like that. But from there, it should be pretty simple to write the essay. Um, so yeah, that's pretty much everything that I have for exam prep or not exam preparation, but for performance during exams. To conclude, I want you excuse me, I would like you all to take a second and reflect on this question. When taking exams, I used to blank. Now I will in the future blank. So yeah, think about how you can apply this stuff into your own life and into your own courses that you're taking in EK right now. And yeah, that concludes this video. I hope you all have a great rest of your day.